Former Chinese President Jiang Zemin may or may not be dead. The Chinese government won't say. And if you live in China, internet searches using his name are being blocked tonight. If he were dead, it would be huge news. Jiang was China's leader from 1993 to 2003, an important era, just as China was becoming a major player in the international community and the international economy. If you forget about it, here's a little flashback. Those were the days I was a CNN White House correspondent covering Bill Clinton. President Jiang's informal evening trip to the White House set the stage for a dramatic and difficult U.S.-China summit. The White House residence was the scene of a nearly 2-hour warm-up meeting that began with a tour and included discussions of Taiwan, Tibet, and differences over human rights. Beyond any specific agreements, administration officials say this summit is essential to building closer ties between the two countries and their two leaders. Kind of hard to look at. I was a little bit younger there. Here's what happens. Here's the difference. You want to see the difference between the two countries? Let's say you live here in the United States and you've heard the rumor Jiang Zemin may have died. Well, you might do what many Americans would do. You could go to Google and you could type in Jiang Zemin's name. If you wanted to see that news, you touch down on the keyboard. And comes Jiang Zemin. You do your Google search, and you would find out right here. The latest news would pop up, including China Censors web searches. You see some background. You see some photos. We do this every day. When a subject comes up, we go to Google or another search engine, and we do it. But here's how this would have happened if you were in China today, and you were following a social media site maybe, and you heard this rumor. You would go to your internet connection. You would go on your keyboard. You would type in Jiang Zemin. When you hit search, this is what would happen right here. A couple of things about biography, but here's the key point right here. Censorship. According to relevant laws, regulations, and policies, some search results were not shown. Let's get some insights on this fascinating development. Nicholas Kristof, the veteran columnist for the New York Times. Nick Kristof, let's start first with Jiang Zemin. Why would the Chinese leadership be so determined? Maybe he'd passed, maybe he has not passed, but why would the leadership be so determined to keep its own people just from going on the internet and trying to find out, trying to search his name?
It's essentially reflex. I don't think it's really a formal policy, but whenever anything is considered sensitive, and nothing is really more sensitive than the illness or death of a leader, then the instinct is just to go out and censor. And so the people who are actually doing the censorship, they may well not know whether Jiang Zemin is alive or dead. But once they start on that path, then they need to censor not only the characters for Jiang Zemin, but they also need to censor, for example, the word for river, because Jiang's family name, Jiang, is the word for river. And so you can't search the Yellow River. You can't search the Yangtze River now in China. You can't do searches for the 301 Army Hospital because that's where he would be treated. So they sort of start on this path and it becomes completely ridiculous. And in a sense, this is what really turns off and antagonizes so many young Chinese, that it just feels so patronizing to them.
And when you go through all that, his name, the symbol for his name is the symbol for river. 301, the Army Hospital where the leaders are taken if they're in dire straits. The fact that they can respond so quickly, though, is we may think it's odd. We may question how long they can keep the genie in the bottle, but they're very good at this.
They become very good at censorship. But the problem is really that the public gets better. Chinese is a language that is where there are a lot of homonyms. So when one word is censored, then you can immediately come up with another. So, you know, for example, June 4th is typically censored because that's the date of the 1989 killings of the democracy protesters. But then, you know, students figured out that they can write about May 34th. For example, and get around it that way. And so I don't think this is actually helping really keep Chinese in the dark. I think it's just making people become more ingenious about getting around the rules and irritating them in the process. And a reflex, as you described it at the beginning of our conversation anyway. How much so is it a more important and more aggressive, perhaps reflex, a better way to put it, in the wake of the Arab Spring? We have watched internet crackdowns in China accelerate because of news happening in the Arab world and in North Africa. CNN International has been knocked off the air several times, so it's not just the internet. Censorship increasing. Why? I think the answer is pretty obvious, but why is the Chinese government so sensitive to keeping news of pro-democracy demonstrations, perhaps pro-democracy progress around the world, and some of the setbacks from its own people? You know, I think from our vantage point abroad, we look at China and we see it as this rising power and an incredibly strong regime. I think from their point of view, the Chinese leadership sees themselves as just running along this hamster wheel, trying desperately to stay on top. They're very worried about maintaining economic growth without having too much inflation that will annoy people. They're seeing growing number of protests. They were really terrified by not only Arab Spring, but by the calls for a Jasmine revolution in China that would echo it. And they, I think, really feel profoundly insecure. They worry that these electronic means will be one way that will get people to unite and network and organize demonstrations against the regime. So that has made them exceptionally sensitive to the whole, web-based, to the Chinese version of Twitter, Sina Weibo, which is, what a lot of these, where a lot of these terms have been blocked, for example. It's something that they, I think, really wake up in the middle of the night in cold sweat about.